Meanwhile in Rossgard, Eris and Aqua were having a hard time dealing with the amount of customers at the store. Since Shiki and Makoto were currently away, and Lime was on a special mission by Tomoe. That left Eris and Aqua all alone, and barely hanging on. Before, Eris had a crash out for being overworked and underpaid. Aqua brought her back to her senses, since they almost hit the sales quota for the day. Having Lime away really put the two girls in a tight position, but Eris was going to make sure Lime's wallet felt her anger. Meanwhile, south of Rossgard, we find Lime walking the streets of Laurel with an interesting woman companion. The woman in question is the one and only Hibiki the hero. As they continued their walk down the streets of Laurel, Hibiki advises Lime to ease up on the amount of fun he's been having at night, since one should never overindulge in the pleasures of life. Although Lime would have loved to talk about his nightlife, he was more interested in what was going on between Hibiki and Bretta. Hibiki replied honestly that nothing was going on between them, since he has not confessed his feelings. But even if he did, she would reject him there and then. Lime thought that was a bit cold-hearted, but fair. Since Lime decided to get personal, it was Hibiki's turn to pry for answers on why Lime was currently in Laurel, and why he was sticking around. Lime confessed that it was a coincidence that they both were in Laurel since he was sent to inspect the area for a potential new store. And if she wanted, she could confirm with the higher-ups in Laurel. Although Lime was lying, Hibiki seemed to believe it because it was half the truth. But Lime's real mission was to follow the hero and keep an eye on her movements by Tomoe. When they arrived at their destination, Hibiki thanked Lime for accompanying her to pick up Chia from her training. As the two entered the temple, after confirming their identities, they were led to a waiting room. While waiting, a sudden pressure filled the room, and they became isolated from the outside world. Lime prepared for battle, and Hibiki followed right after. Although Hibiki didn't understand what was going on, she first had to prioritize the safety of Chia. Hibiki then asked Lime for help in saving Chia. Lime agreed, on the condition that she tell him what kind of training Chia was doing at the temple, since his curiosity always got the better of him. Hibiki reluctantly agreed. The two then busted down the doors that were keeping them trapped and headed to the center of the temple. On the way there, demon soldiers tried to stop them, but got cut down with ease since the two had each other's back. Before reaching the center hall, Hibiki told Lime about Chia's training per their agreement. When they reached the center hall, they found Chia praying inside one of her barriers. Lime took a sec to think about what was happening, since 3 of the priestess guards were dead on the floor, and the other 3 were demons in disguise. Lime concluded that the 3 demons must have been in human disguise, but since the priestess awakened the power of the mind's eye that Hibiki told him about, it lets the user see the true form of things. She must have found out about the spies, and the demons had to act. Before Lime finished his thought, Hibiki sped past him in anger and frustration. This time Lime was in shock at how fast she moved, thinking that he could not keep up with her. When the 2 girls reunited, they both were relieved to see each other. Lime felt out of place, but even more so when Chia started staring at him. Chia then started speaking about a large tree, a forest, a dragon, and the coming of rain. Lime cut her off before she said any more, and suggested they leave this place. Hibiki said they need to report this, but Lime said he had to leave, and that she could get all the credit, and that she owed him dinner. Lime left with the urgency to report that the mind's eye bypassed his mind's protection. Meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, Zeph was insistent on holding a friendly sparring match the following day. Makoto understood immediately. It was nothing more than a pretext to gauge their military strength. Still, he agreed. Demonstrating a measure of power now would only work in their favor when negotiations began later on. Curious about the details, Makoto asked who his opponent would be. Zeph explained that it would be one of the demon generals, or someone of equal strength. With the plans for tomorrow settled, Makoto found himself wondering how to spend the rest of the day. That was when Zeph made a suggestion. Makoto should visit the Temple of High Spirits. To guide him, Zeph added, his 2 daughters would accompany him. The idea of meeting high spirits for the first time certainly intrigued Makoto. At the same time, it irritated him slightly. It sounded less like a proposal, and more like a decision that had already been made. Just then, Rona entered the room to summon the Demon Lord. Zeph took the opportunity to excuse himself, bidding Makoto farewell and informing him that his daughters would be waiting at the main gate. With that, Zeph and Rona departed together. Shiki arrived shortly afterward. Makoto asked where Mio was, to which Shiki replied that she had gone off to explore the rest of the castle. Makoto wasn't surprised. Instead, he informed Shiki that the Demon Lord's 2 young daughters are waiting for them at the main gate. At that, Shiki couldn't help but wonder aloud if there was some ulterior motive behind assigning the young ladies as their guides. Makoto brushed off Shiki's teasing and turned the question back on him, asking why he had arrived right after Rona, and whether the 2 of them had something going on. Shiki explained that they had both merely been probing for information. However, Rona had little to work with, and their exchange had ended quickly. Makoto then informed Shiki about the sparring match scheduled for tomorrow, and adding one specific request, that Mio not be paired with Reft. Shiki understood immediately, and without further explanation. Turning to the main gate, Sari and Lucia could be found waiting for Makoto and his party. When Makoto arrived, the 2 groups exchanged greetings, though it was clear that neither side made a particularly good first impression. Lucia, in particular, couldn't reconcile Makoto's humble demeanor with the overwhelming power he possessed. Makoto, for his part, was less than impressed by the attitude she directed toward him. Sensing the tension, Sari rebuked her sister for speaking so rudely to their guest. Lucia, however, refused to relent. In her eyes, Makoto was the one to defeat her master, Lo, and that alone was reason enough for hostility. Before the argument could escalate further, a voice rang out, mocking Lucia for how loudly the weak tended to bark. Enraged, Lucia demanded that the speaker repeat herself. That was when Mio stepped into view, openly declaring her animosity toward the demon princess. What followed was a rapid exchange of sharp words, the 2 hurling insults back and forth. Makoto had no desire to insert himself between 2 women locked in combat, but he also had no intention of letting the situation spiral out of control. With a thought, he restrained them both using his invisible magic armor. Mio offered no resistance and remained still. Lucia, on the other hand, was left confused and furious, unable to move despite her efforts. She demanded to know if this was Makoto's doing. Makoto calmly confirmed that it was. He then added that he would release her shortly, just as soon as she answered one question: whether the temple they were heading to always looked quite so ominous. Sari and Lucia followed Makoto's gaze, only to find that the entrance to the temple itself was distorted, its shape warping unnaturally. Makoto assumed the phenomenon was simply the result of high spirits residing within. However, the expressions on Sari's and Lucia's faces made it clear that this was anything but normal. Shiki then spoke up, informing Makoto that it appeared the power of both the fire spirit and the earth spirit was spilling out of the temple, as though the 2 were fighting. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Makoto suggested that they report the matter to the Demon Lord. It was a sound judgment. Nevertheless, both Lucia and Sari moved to stop him. Sari insisted that they enter the temple immediately to investigate, assuring Makoto that she would personally guarantee his safety. Lucia quickly followed, echoing the proposal, and even offering an apology for her earlier behavior. Makoto understood their concern, but reasoned that the decision was not theirs to make. The risks clearly outweighed the benefits, and such matters should be left to the Demon Lord. Still, the 2 sisters pressed on, arguing that there could be people trapped inside, and that hesitation could cost lives. At that moment, Shiki spoke in a manner uncharacteristic of him, agreeing that they should go in and rescue anyone caught within. Before Makoto could respond, Mio sharply cut Shiki off. She rebuked him, declaring that the lives of the city's people were of no consequence to them, and accusing him of upsetting her young master. Makoto found the situation troublesome. Though he understood Mio's position, siding with her now would only reflect poorly on him. Her words, after all, were far too inhumane to ignore. In the end, Makoto relented and agreed to enter the temple. Sari immediately began a lengthy chant, carefully opening a small gap within the distortion. Lucia, unable to restrain herself, proudly boasted of her sister's talent. Mio, however, had no patience for such displays. With ease, she opened a far larger portal directly beside Sari, and without a word, stepped inside alongside Makoto. The sight left both sisters completely speechless. When Makoto and Mio emerged from the portal, they did not find cries for help. Instead, they were met by earth and fire spirits swirling violently through the space, manifesting fully in their elemental forms. Sari and Lucia immediately urged everyone to hurry toward the grand altar. Without waiting, the two sisters took the lead, with Mio and Shiki following close behind. As they advanced, the spirits' attacks grew more frequent and more intense the closer they drew to their destination. Mio and Shiki had little trouble protecting themselves, and Makoto as well, but the same could not be said for the two girls at the front. Though Sari and Lucia managed to block most of the assaults, more and more attacks began slipping through their defenses over time. When both were nearing their limit, Sari called for a retreat. Lucia agreed. They were clearly outmatched, yet even as she said it, Sari knew that retreat would be far easier to suggest than to execute. Seeing their desperation, Makoto finally stepped in, announcing that he would open a path for them to withdraw. Sari couldn't help but scoff, remarking that he made it sound far simpler than it truly was. That comment drew Mio's ire. She declared flatly that the situation was little more than child's play. Taking her at her word, Sari challenged her. If it truly was so easy, then they should press forward and let Mio demonstrate her power. Turning to Makoto, Sari then asked for his help as well. They still had not confirmed whether anyone inside the temple remained alive. Mio immediately rebuked her, calling it shameful for a candidate for the next demon lord to seek aid from an outsider. Sari fell silent. Makoto briefly considered retreating. Interfering in what amounted to internal demon affairs seemed unwise. However, Shiki advised otherwise. It would be far better if they were owed a favor. Makoto agreed. With the decision made, Mio then began chanting and formed a magic array. For a brief moment, the entire space trembled. Then, one by one, the surrounding spirits began to fall. Sari could only stare in stunned silence at the overwhelming display of power. Moments later, Makoto detected 4 separate locations still showing signs of life. He immediately dispatched Mio and Shiki to investigate. Meanwhile, he continued pushing forward, shielding the 2 girls behind him with his magic armor. As they continued forward, the walls around them began to shift. The structure grew less like a temple and more like a living maze, passages closing off as new ones formed without warning. Mio telepathically asked Makoto if she could simply tear down the walls to create an easier path. Shiki immediately replied through the same channel, firmly requesting that she refrain from doing so. This was an investigation, not an outright assault. Not long after, Mio and Shiki returned, each escorting the people they had managed to rescue. While they worked to find a way through the shifting maze, Sari and Lucia began communicating with one another telepathically, discussing, in hushed tones, the overwhelming strength they had just witnessed from Mio and Shiki. Makoto noticed their silence and quietly expanded his sakai, listening in. The sisters were speculating over who could have orchestrated such an incident, whether it was their father or some unknown third party. But one conclusion was undeniable. The Kuzunoha Company possessed enough military power to level an entire nation. From there, their discussion took a more personal turn. They reasoned that political marriage would likely be unavoidable, and that one of them might be expected to wed Makoto. What remained undecided was which of them it would be. Makoto was left in disbelief at how detailed their deliberations became, particularly when the conversation veered into his supposed preferences. Before he could dwell on it any longer, Makoto sensed a powerful presence approaching. Moments later, an earth spirit emerged, filling the entire passageway. It took the form of a massive ox, its body composed of jagged stone with saber-like tusks protruding from its mouth. Sensing a large-scale magical attack, Makoto ordered Mio to nullify it at once. Simultaneously, Shiki raised protective barriers around the 2 sisters. When the earth spirit realized its magic was being rendered ineffective, it lowered its head and charged. Before it could gain any real momentum, Makoto halted it completely, his invisible magic armor stopping the massive creature dead in its tracks. Lucia and Sari could only stare in shock. Such a thing should have been impossible. And yet, their eyes told them otherwise. Judging the area too confined for a proper battle, Makoto forced the earth spirit backward with tremendous strength, shattering the wall behind it and clearing a path toward the grand altar. Upon reaching the altar, Makoto instructed Mio to restrain the earth spirit while he continued protecting the others. Mio agreed, but at that same moment, Makoto sensed another presence approaching. the fire spirit. He immediately ordered Shiki to investigate. However, upon hearing this, Mio then abruptly declared that she would pursue the fire spirit instead, leaving Shiki to handle the earth spirit. The decision unsettled Makoto. He had intended to send Shiki, trusting his restraint far more than Mio's. Before he could object, Shiki spoke with firm conviction. He assured Makoto that he could handle the earth spirit. With Mio gone, the earth spirit wasted no time. It unleashed a powerful wave of magic toward Shiki, forcing him to raise a defensive barrier. Shiki responded immediately, countering with both an earth array and a fire array of his own, sending the spells hurtling toward the massive spirit. The earth spirit raised stone walls to block the fire spells, but allowed the earth-based magic to pass through, only for it to vanish before ever reaching its target. As Shiki ceased his barrage, the earth spirit charged at him. Rather than meet the charge head-on, Shiki chose to evade, narrowly weaving through the incoming attacks until he had repositioned himself. Learning from his earlier mistake, he then cast a single, full-powered fire spell. The earth spirit answered in kind, erupting jagged earth spikes from the ground. The two spells collided with tremendous force, engulfing the surroundings in a violent explosion. When the dust settled, both Shiki and the earth spirit had suffered damage. Without hesitation, Shiki drew his sword, imbuing it with multiple enchantments. Abandoning ranged combat, he charged forward, opting for close-quarters battle. His strikes were precise and relentless, carving into the massive beast from every angle. The earth spirit struggled to track his movements, and the accumulated damage began to show. Cornered, the earth spirit made a desperate move. It summoned earth arrays from all sides, trapping Shiki at the center between itself and the surrounding formations. Shiki quickly grasped its intent. An all-out assault was coming, one that would devastate everything in the center. Earth magic would do little to the spirit itself, leaving Shiki as the sole target. There was no room to evade, so Shiki chose to attack. He summoned an array directly beneath the earth spirit, binding it in conjured chains. In the same motion, Shiki leapt onto the creature's back, drove his blade deep into it, and shattered every ring he wore, unleashing Ragnarok. The resulting blast consumed everything in its path. When the light finally faded, Shiki remained standing, barely, badly wounded, yet victorious. As for Mio, she was locked in battle with the fire spirit, a phoenix. The great phoenix relentlessly hurled fire spell after fire spell at her, but each attack was effortlessly absorbed by Mio's magic. At the same time, she returned fire with spells of her own. Time and again, the phoenix's wings were torn apart, only to regenerate as quickly as they were destroyed. Even so, such regeneration could not continue indefinitely. The phoenix understood this. Betting everything on one final gamble, it scattered thousands of blazing feathers throughout the air, then launched every last one toward Mio in a single, overwhelming barrage. Mio did not move. She allowed the attack to strike her head-on. When the storm of feathers subsided, she emerged completely unharmed. In response, Mio released a spell of black flame, fire so absolute that even the mighty phoenix could not withstand it. With no means of escape, the fire spirit burned, its form collapsing as it fell from the sky. Thus, Mio claimed her victory. From a distance, Sahir and Lucia bore witness to what could only be described as the impossible. Comparing demon generals to Shiki and Mio felt meaningless now. Merely imagining such power bordered on madness, let alone seeing it made manifest. At last, the sisters understood why the demon lord had acted with such caution. A sobering thought took root in Sahir's mind. They must never allow Makoto to become their enemy. For if they did, the demon race itself could be wiped out. As the temple slowly returned to normal, Sahir came to a decision. She now knew what must be done to secure the future of the demon race.